Welcome everyone to episode 9 of the SJX podcast. I'm here with Brandon. And today we're going to start by talking about some of the recent launches that we have seen in the run-up to and during Geneva Watch Days. I think some of the standout or more notable watches came from a handful of independent watchmakers. One of them is a collaboration between Vianney Halter and Massena Lab. Brandon, you've seen the watch. What are your thoughts?
It's an interesting watch. Vianney's been doing some interesting collaborations of late. I think the collaborations with Louis Erard are pretty cool, bringing his aesthetic to a lower price point. This one feels more like a hybrid between those collaborations, which are fundamentally more aesthetic, and his own work, which is a little bit more technical in its nature. The mystery minute hand is pretty interesting. This sort of stainless steel emblem or shield attached to the crystal is certainly unusual. It'll definitely give it a really strong wrist presence. And then I think the use of the vintage new old stock Minerva caliber is pretty interesting for this because the model is called the Old Soul and imbuing it with that new old stock vintage
Mm,
caliber certainly does bring that vintage feel to it. Of course, being a vintage caliber, it kept pretty much in its original state. So no shock protection or anything like that we would typically expect in a normal watch that, somebody might wear, every day. But as a collector item, this is a, hard cap on the number that can be the number that can be made because they did only,
mm.
I believe, source, let fewer than 50 of these new old stock calibers for this project. And so, it's I don't know if it's my personal aesthetic. It's a little bit fussy, but I mean that's the whole steampunk thing, and that resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think, well, personally, I liked the Louis Erard collaboration a lot. I bought one. I think it was a very sort of clever way of making the recognizable steampunk Vianney Halter, Jeff Barnes aesthetic affordable, very affordable. The new watch, as you say, channels some of the same thing with the plate on the front. I think for a watch with Vianney's name on it, it is affordable. For a time-only watch with a vintage movement, it's a little bit pricey. The floating minute hand is novel, it's interesting, but it's not new. We have seen it before. Um, so I think it feels to me like a watch that probably would cater to fans of specific kinds of independent watchmaking, fans of Vianney. Um, yeah, I'll be interested to see who the profile of the clients who buy this watch.
Yeah. Uh, Another thing is, this watch is fairly unique to me in that, we look at a lot of watches, we see the photos, and then usually sometime later we see them in real life, and usually they are what we expect. With this stainless steel kind of shield thing on top
Mm,
of the crystal, there are some photos provided, but I really think this is a watch that is going to really have to be experienced in person. I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that it could have a really fascinating presence on the wrist. It's definitely something I'll be interested
yeah,
to, seek out if I
yeah,
find out that there's
yeah.
one nearby.
On the topic of this, the shield on the plate on the front. Generally, I actually don't like this type of construction because when you put a plate or anything basically on a sapphire crystal, you have to glue it to the crystal. And to me, the even though the glue they use, I'm sure, will last for the next 10,000 years, I always feel that this is something that feels a little out of place on an expensive watch. It was the same thing with the Hublot Murakami, which I like a lot and which I own. But the face of the flower on the Hublot is actually attached with glue because there's no other
Mm,
way you can attach something physically to a sapphire crystal. Because if you
hmm.
drill a hole and you put a screw in, if you tighten the screw too much, you crack the crystal. So it's always glue. And it's the same thing actually Peterman Bedard did with their dial of their time only watch. right? The date beat seconds is a
Mhm.
sapphire dial, and there's this plate in the center. It's the same
Yeah.
thing. You have to attach it with glue, which I don't know if I like that much on expensive watches.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the use of adhesive is, to your point, these are industrial adhesives. They're going to last forever. And, you know, typically what we look for in a high-end mechanical watch is the ability to have it restored after time. If the sapphire crystal were to crack, there's no way to take I'm imagining there's no way to take this off and apply it to a new uh, a
I
new
think
watch
you
some point down the line.
can, but it's very complex. It has to be removed with a chemical method, right? To dissolve
Mm.
the
Hmm.
adhesive without damaging the components, and then you reattach it.
Okay.
So it's going to be probably more complex than the average good watchmaker can do.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, the thing about the way Peter Benbedard did it is that it is on the dial underneath the crystal.
yeah,
This is sitting up on top,
yeah,
and being stainless steel is not nearly as scratch resistant as sapphire. So this thing will, wear and show scratches and show that over time. It's also gonna, probably collect little bits of lint
yeah,
here and there in all of the little
yeah.
corners and angles. Now, those are practical considerations that for a watch that has a new old stock caliber that's not shock protected, are somewhat hypothetical complaints, from me on that. But this isn't a watch that's going to be on somebody's wrist every single day. It is a cool, very striking look. I'll be interested to see it, try it on. I do think that it could have a really three-dimensional
Wow.
character to it, but yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure that this is something that I hope becomes a trend.
Yeah. Well, on the topic of practicality in watches, there was a new annual calendar launched that was conceived to be practical.
Yeah, yeah, the Berneron Quantième Annuel is a pretty neat watch. It's this has four jump windows, so that and it displays the time and the data in a really intuitive and interesting way, top to bottom, left to right. I think that one of the things that all the great calendar watches have in common is that they really have an understanding for the priority of information and displaying the information in a way that is intuitive and readable. This is where I struggle sometimes with, calendars that have kind of a pointer date. Obviously, the most widespread
Mm,
format for displaying a date on a, perpetual calendar type of watch. But at the end of the day, there's just not very much resolution, at arm's length to be able to see that. Maybe it's just maybe I'm getting old and my eyes aren't what they once were. I think the interesting thing about the Berneron is, first of all, the four instantaneously jumping windows. So it's a jump hour with a typical kind of regulator style minute hand that goes all the way around, uh, along with a retrograde date display. Also has a running seconds hand that has a jumping day night indicator in a window
mm,
there. And then going left to right, you have the day of the week, then of course the date in the center, and then the
mm,
month. So, if you read it up to down, left to right, you know that it's, it could be 3:15 and so many seconds, and
yeah.
then it's, Thursday, the 13th of April.
Mm,
So it's very convenient to read. It's interesting, and I think especially coming from Berneron is interesting because obviously the first watch, the Mirage, was this sort of really kind of amorphous, flowing, anything but symmetrical type of watch with a movement to match, full gold construction. That's really the through line to the annual calendar is the full gold construction of the movement plates, the bridges, the dial, the hands. Obviously, in this case, this is a platinum case with steel bumpers. That's another interesting thing about it. Um, what are your initial impressions of the Burner Run?
I think when I first heard about the watch or first saw the movement, I think the first thing that came to mind is that it reinforced my perception that Sylvain Berneron is a very smart designer and marketer because he's not just creating a product, he's creating a product that I think fits with current trends and tastes, while also shaping his brand in a certain way. He's very careful. He's smart enough not to pigeonhole his brand, right?
Hmm.
The asymmetric watch that looks a bit, the same category as the Cartier Crash and so on. Now it's something completely different. It's symmetrical, it's complicated. It also chimes with, I think, enthusiasts, tastes and preferences, in terms of, it's easy to use. It has these protective plates on the case that make it easier to service and refinish because enthusiasts always complain servicing expensive, it's difficult to do. So I think this is a really, really clever product from a very clever brand. Uh, do I like the design? Not really. Like you said, I think it is legible, but I think for me, over time, as I have experience with more watches, I own more watches. I think actually practicality becomes less and less interesting to me. I think a watch has to be cool, appealing, sexy in some way. I think
Hmm.
one of the worst perpetual calendars in the world in terms of practicality is the Vianney Halter Antiqua. Setting the watch is a pain. Probably, if you own it for 20 years, you'll break it twice or three times when you set it. It's really a pain. For sure, I think it is a certainty that everyone who owns an Antiqua will have it broken at least once. So it's the worst. But I think it's probably one of the most interesting perpetual calendars wristwatches ever. And of course, credit doesn't just go to Vianney, but also to Jeff Barnes, who designed it, who came up with the idea. And I think so. I think that for me, it shows that practicality is important, and actually, practicality is very appealing as an intellectual concept.
Hmm.
But for me, it's not the most important thing. Uh,
Yes.
yeah,
It really appeals to me on an intellectual level because I feel like there are so many aspects of horology that have already been solved in some way.
yeah,
Escapements are extremely mature. There is still a little bit of innovation to be found,
yeah,
but generally speaking, watches keep time perfectly well enough for anyone and can run for decades. There's all these little things, shock protection, different types of features that have already been solved so many times in so many different ways. I feel like user friendliness and safety functionality, this is why watches like the Legacy Machine Perpetual from MB&F really appeals to me. This is why the Moser Perpetual appeals to me, and this is why the Berneron appeals to me
yeah,
is because they've been able to find ways to make the ownership
yeah,
experience easier.
yeah,
And I get you that watches at the end of the day, in order to really justify their existence, have to probe some aspect of art. I don't think there are that. Not certainly not every watch, and frankly, not very many watches really cross over into, for me, what I perceive to be an artistic expression. But I think that the intellectual approach to solving these problems is another
mm,
way that makers of these high-end products can justify their
yeah,
price points and show value. And I think, just in terms of another thing that you mentioned in terms of user friendliness, the steel bumpers. So just for the listeners, this watch is mostly platinum. By mass, it's about 85% platinum. But then it has these thin, replaceable 904L stainless steel, basically bumpers that screw onto the platinum case and that are attached from the underside, so that or if you get it scratched or whatever, you can easily just change out the component that was scratched. It's kind of a cool concept. We've seen this before a little bit with the Grand Seiko Kodo Tourbillon, which was a platinum case inside a titanium external case. But in that particular example, I don't think it's so easy to remove or replace the external case. This is much more designed to be a way to avoid having destructive polishing during servicing while still enabling you to have a watch that
Yeah.
looks like it's brand new.
You mentioned the practical calendars. Practical calendars have been done before with many different approaches, right? One of the earliest was well, the earliest was probably the IWC Da Vinci, and now, like you
Hmm.
said, we have MBNF, we have Moser, Ludwig Oechlin has done like, I don't know, 10 different calendars,
Hmm.
annual, simple, perpetual, moon phase, with very simple and basic functionality, yet very clever. So I think the concept of the Berneron is the approach is novel, but the fundamental concept has been tried before. I think really what sets this apart is the smart way in which it's been designed, presented, explained, and marketed. I think this really shows actually the strength and advantage of being a designer and brand builder as opposed to just being a watchmaker. I think if
Hmm.
a very clever and this movement was obviously constructed by an engineer, right? You need an engineer to do it. But if an engineer had alone had created a watch like this, I don't think it would have received anywhere near the same level of attention. Simply because watchmakers and engineers very rarely are able to present their ideas and their brands like that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, I think Sylvan's experience outside the watch industry is helpful in this regard too, because I think he has some background in the automotive industry, if I recall, and that really brings a wider perspective to this, and that's part of it. I think the other part is, he there's kind of a shock value to both the watch that he debuted, the Mirage.
Mm.
And then following that with this, completely symmetrical, complicated, a little on the thicker side, 10 mil, not overly thick for what it is by any means. But just a more sort of chunky, substantial, almost, in some ways it almost reminds me of a Lange looking at it
Mm.
from the front. You have this very sort of um, almost like Teutonic aesthetic to it on the front, and then this very sort of orderly, organized movement on the back with the full gear train concealed behind the plate. So you've got just these kind of spectacular winding wheels across the center, nice free sprung balance, just sort of off on its own. Um, it's definitely it's not really in the tradition
Mm.
of you know, for example, Vallée de Joux watchmaking, which,
Mm.
is flowing bridges and all the gears
Mm.
exposed and, a very traditional dial layout. This is very, it's coming at it from basically the other direction,
Yeah.
focusing on the core elements.
And well, speaking of traditional watchmaking, Ferdinand Berthoud has also launched something at Geneva Watch Days that is, well, as traditional as it gets.
Yeah, this is a watch I've really been excited to talk about. We got to see this a few months ago and shoot some photos and do a video with it. Um, I gotta say, like this is the type of watch that gets me excited about watchmaking. This is one of those watches that I do feel like moves into the field of art. In this case, this is the third watch in the kind of open source project that is Naissance Dune, and I'm never confident in my
Mhm.
pronunciation, but basically, this is an industry project, that kind of got its start with Grubel Forsey and Philippe Dufour, carried on with Urwerk, and now Ferdinand Berthoud's getting involved. And really the purpose of this, the watch itself is just a byproduct of a project to document and pass down the the handcraft, and
Mhm.
that sounds, you could listen to me say that and it's like, man, isn't that every watch, isn't that every watch that we buy? But in this case, this is one of the few watches that is truly handmade. So
Mhm.
11,000 hours of labor goes into producing each watch. That's not just like R&D costs or R&D hours. That's each unit is
Mhm.
getting 11,000 hours. So if you add that up, that's a full year's labor for 5.5 people. And in this case, it was actually,
Mhm.
partial focus for about 80 people putting together each of these watches. And the thing that's most exciting about it to me is the split bimetallic Guillaume style balance
Hmm.
that has, temperature compensation in the form of these, two different types of metals fused together in the balance wheel that
Hmm.
opens up, and contracts as temperatures change.
Hmm.
We solve this in a far more elegant way with glycator balances, in
Hmm.
the mid-century, but and basically the process for making these bimetallic balances in particular had really been lost to time. There's not been
Hmm.
a new one made. There have been watches with this type of balance, but they've been new old stock or they've been produced using, scientific methods. This is like, how Breguet would have made it in his own time. This is a really spectacular display of hand craftsmanship and of just going all the way to the end of what it means to make a watch by hand. And I've been really excited to talk about it all year, so I'm glad it's finally
Yeah.
out.
I mean, well, we both saw the watch at Watches and Wonders, um, and I agree with you. I'm impressed by the artisanal skill that was employed to produce the watch. But I think this also brings us back to a topic that we have discussed in past episodes, in that fundamentally this is a time-only watch with very nice finishing. Uh, the you already mentioned this before. Basically, the only thing you're buying, the primary thing you're buying here is labor, a lot of labor. For me, there isn't much. Uh, there's very little invention in the watch, very little that is new.
Hmm.
Maybe some techniques that were used in the past and are not widely used today were revived for this. Uh, so while I respect the watch, for me there is very little appeal, especially at the kind of prices these are at today.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, it's basically very expensive Swiss labor plus luxury goods margin, which makes it incredibly expensive. So, I respect it, but there's for me, it's not something that speaks to me. I mean, even if I had
Mm.
$500 million, I'm not sure I would buy one.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I had a very different reaction to the watch on the wrist. I think the one of the things that differentiates this for me from past
Mm.
handmade watches, whether it's the Greubel Forsey Handmade One, the Handmade Two, the other Naissance d'Une project watches, is that this has a far more elaborate construction.
Mm.
So it has a fusee and chain. Every single link in the chain is made by hand, assembled by hand, polished by hand. And one of the other things that they did that's interesting is, unlike the Handmade One, Handmade Two that had I think it was either Inca block or KIF shock protection, they've actually handmade their own shock absorber that sits on top of a diamond end stone on both sides. And
Mm.
so I think that, it's just an example of taking it even further. And
Mm.
and I have a just tremendous respect for this type of thing. I mean, we disagree about this all the time because, I have sort of a soft spot for, quote unquote boring watches.
Mm. Yeah.
And I, would never I would vehemently fight back if
Oh,
if you called this one boring. But
yeah.
I do hear where you're coming from, that it is fundamentally traditional, fundamentally nothing new, but kind of by design. Like the
Yeah.
expression here is the the commitment to knowledge. One of the
Mm.
things that they've done here is they've created this like library of all of these videos, documents, photos, information, so that this information can live on and be
Oh,
used by others down the line. And I don't know. For me, that just kind of warms my heart. I'm kind of a geek for how things are
oh,
made, as anyone who's read any of my factory
oh,
visits will attest. But
oh,
yeah, this is something that's been on my mind a lot throughout
oh.
the year.
I mean, I'm looking at pictures of the watch again now, the pictures that were shot during Watches and Wonders, and I think another thing that is worth noting is that a watch like this, and also the Greubel Forsey handmade, also you look at some of George Daniel's watches. Watches like these actually also show the limitations of making a watch by hand.
Hmm.
If you look at the shape, size, form, thickness of the bridges, they're actually quite basic, right? The finger bridges
Hmm.
are very straight. The barrel bridge is also very straight, very linear. I think when you make things by hand, I think for better or worse, it looks a little bit like a pocket watch made in the 18th, 19th century.
Hmm.
And I mean, for me, I think the ideal today is something that blends the best of both worlds, right? Mechanical production, some automated or mechanical aspects together with manual work. I think doing everything by machine is unattractive. Doing everything by hand also not necessarily is the most attractive.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like to your point about the Antiqua, there's the first most important thing of any watch or any work of art, really, whether it's music, film, paintings, is the idea, the reason why you're making it. And I think that, the watchmakers of today, the greats have for example, Journe,
Mm,
he has a vision. That's where the art is created, is in his vision, is an idea
mm,
for what he
mm,
wants to make. And then he's trying to adhere to the traditional craft, make sure that they're, serviceable long into the future, made with traditional materials. But beyond that, he's using wire erosion,
yeah.
CNC, even semi-automated CNC perlage on base
Uh,
plates.
uh,
Something that's very straightforward
uh,
to do, but he feels like the value that he's providing lies
mm,
elsewhere,
mm,
and obviously the many in the market agree with that. Certainly I agree
uh,
with that, and so I think that's to your point of like threading that needle of old and new to bring a vision to
mm.
life, and the vision kind of being the value. Is that how you think about watches like the Antiqua?
Yeah, I think actually one of the fundamental differences between what we have all talked about is that very vision. I think Francois Paul Jones's vision, his vision was not to say, I want to make a handmade tourbillon. I think fundamentally his vision is I want to build a watch brand that will be considered as great as Breguet in 100 years.
Hmm.
I'm sure when he was very young, some people might have said he's delusional. But now, today, I think there are people who would agree that's entirely possible. And I think that kind of vision, a broader vision, is probably one of the key things that set him apart. I think often watches today are product-centric visions, right? Product-centric in the
Hmm.
sense that I want to make a handmade watch. I want to make a handmade tourbillon with chain and fusee. That's very product-centric vision. And this actually also brings us back to, I think, Berneron. I think it's clear he has a vision for his brand. He is, by training, a designer, and I guess by extension, a marketer, right? He's shaping the brand rather than a watchmaker. And I think that's what sets him apart also, is that he sees it more than just a product, but he's also seeing it as a brand.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Antiqua, I guess interestingly, the Antiqua, the original concept was more or less a product. Right? Jeff Barnes, the designer, I think his concept, well, having spoken to him, his concept was a line of products in this same style, the steampunk aesthetic, with certain interesting features, like the
Hmm.
mystery roto and so on.
Yeah. But even just the idea to, create a family of products around something like a steampunk aesthetic, when he was doing that, that was highly innovative. Now it seems like almost everything that has been done. Obviously people will continue to find things that have not been done. But back when the Antiqua launched, back when Vianney and Jeff were working together, it was just a different landscape,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
this was something that was coming into a world full of Rolexes and and Pateks.
yeah. But I think regardless of what I think of the watch, I think your positive opinion of the Ferdinand Berthoud will prove right because the first example will be sold at Phillips, right, with
Hmm.
proceeds going to charity, and I'm sure it will sell for a lot of money. I think the watch fits today's taste perfectly, and I think what you say is accurate, and then it will sell for it will sell for high six figures or even in excess of 1 million.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just taking the, Grubel 4C Handmade One as a market comp at that end of the market,
Yeah,
that's $1 million watch
yeah,
just simply at retail, let
mm,
alone, at auction. It'll be interesting to see how this does.
yeah,
It's a piece unique in steel. The other then there are going to be 11 that are in a
yeah,
white gold case. But yeah, it's coming
mm,
up this
yeah,
November, where I think most auctions, $1 million steel handmade Ferdinand Berthoud, probably would be the most expensive steel watch to sell at an auction. But I think in this particular upcoming auction, it probably will not be. So, it kind of brings us to the steel 1518 that is
yeah,
returning to market in
yeah.
the same auction, correct?
Yeah. It's it is one of well, Phillips will be selling one of the four known steel 1518s, selling it for the second time, and also selling it at the time where there is another example on the market. Uh so this 1518 first sold about 10 years ago for record price at the time. At the time also it was vintage watches were I think more in favor than they are now. I mean today the flavor of the day is independence.
Hmm.
But independence and I guess modern complicated watches. So it'll be interesting to see how how the watch performs because times have changed, but also the watch I think is coming back to market relatively soon. Usually, major record-setting watches or even other objects don't usually come back to market that soon.
Hmm.
And I think when it comes back to market that so soon, it many of the players will still be around and they will have memories of it being sold
Hmm.
before. And it could be a
I mean,
yeah,
I'm
it
not
could be
even
a
that
good
old.
thing.
I'm not even
Yeah.
that old. I have memories of going to Phillips. I was going to Phillips in London
Uh-huh.
in 2016 and getting to handle this watch.
Yeah.
So, it's in,
Yeah.
my personal memory
Yeah.
of seeing this. So seeing it come back, it is very soon, unlike
Yeah.
some of the other big ticket things that have sold this year, like the Cartier Portico
Yeah.
clock and the Breguet Sympathy clock, which had been off the market for much longer, and
Yeah.
their value is far more mysterious.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
made that created a lot of excitement and
Uh,
enthusiasm. Where we have the the other 1518 that's sort of been sitting waiting for a buyer at a very lofty price point, I think in excess of 20 million,
mhm.
something like that. And the estimate for uh, I remember last time this watch sold, the estimate was 3 million. So when I went to Phillips, I was like, wow, this is a $3 million watch. And then a day later, it was an $11 million watch.
Yeah.
And now the estimate's between 8 and 16. It will be really interesting. One of the things that stands out to me, I was reading some of the coverage, some of the things that you wrote about this watch 10 years ago. And, we were going through kind of a similar time in the watch industry. It felt like a downturn, it feels like a downturn again. I think a lot of the people that are, following the watch world today, some may not remember a time when it felt like the watch world was in decline. You know, curious to kind of get your perspective on kind of the
Yeah.
cyclicality of things, and what's similar, what's different between 2016 and now when this watch is being
Well,
sold.
I think well, I think the first thing that's similar is that the watch I'm guessing will be exactly the same as it was. I saw it in 2016 as well. I had it on my wrist, and again, mental exercise. If I had $500 million, would I buy it? Probably not, because for me, it's not that impressive on the wrist. At the time, I think not just for this Steel 1518, but in general for very high-end watches, record-setting watches at auction, I think often the buying and selling often reflects wider macro trends in the world, right? People who spend a record amount of money on watches must have made money somewhere. So these sort of records will be reflecting certain people in certain countries, industries, places who have made money. And I think for the Steel 1518, it was like this, right? At the time, that wasn't the only watch that sold for a record sum at auction. It wasn't the only vintage watch, right? That was around that period. Also, you had watches like the Rolex Bao Dai, right, owned by the last
Hmm.
emperor of Vietnam, also a record price. Omega stainless steel tourbillon wristwatch, again a record price.
One of my
So
favorite watches ever. That's
yeah,
that's one of the vintage
yeah,
watches that when I remember when that was auctioned and I was just like, wow, not because not only was it so cool and just like technically interesting, but it also just looked like almost the perfect Omega
yeah.
chronometer.
Right. And who knows, you might get a chance to buy it soon. It might come back, come back up for sale as well. So I think,
I think
yeah,
I'll end up being the underbidder,
yeah.
but maybe
So
I can take a shot.
yeah, so yeah, I think the market has cycles, but really great watches can go against the cycles and they can do really well. I don't know where this 1518 will end up. Probably the underbidder from before is still around. He can still be bidding. But obviously, the winning bidder from before will not be bidding because he's presumably selling the watch. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not there are whether the previous audience for this, who presumably are wealthier today, whether they're willing to step up and buy it, and whether there's a new audience that's willing to buy it. I guess in hindsight, 11 million maybe is not so expensive because since then there are many vintage Pateks that have sold for a lot. I think it was in 2021, right? A pink on pink 1518 owned by the cousin or the brother of the King of Egypt. Is it King of Egypt? King of somewhere. Yeah, King of Egypt. Sold for like 10 million US, which is a record for a gold 1518. So,
Hmm.
maybe 11 million Swiss francs for the steel version is not so much. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with this. I'll be very
Hmm.
curious to see who's bidding and where it ends up.
Yeah. And it feels like, it's, 2.5 months away. It feels like almost, the things are changing so fast. It seems
Yeah.
like, who
And
knows what the world will feel like
yeah,
in November.
I think it'll be interesting season also because I believe there are also very interesting complicated pocket watches coming up
Hmm.
this season. As you have seen in the last couple of seasons, there were a lot of pocket watches, clocks, even though such things are mostly out of fashion in terms of today's taste. They all did very well,
Hmm.
and I think we'll see more of those. So it'll be interesting to see whether all these very complicated Swiss English pocket watches still uh, have a large enough audience that demand can be sustained across several auction seasons.
Yeah. Yeah. I always love seeing the complicated pocket watches come up. They're always, it's really the best bang for your buck when it
Yeah,
comes to really high-end watchmaking. It's just frustrating because, they're just not as practical as
yeah,
wristwatches. They're not water resistant. It's, an affectation to carry one around. They're easy to
yeah,
drop.
yeah,
It's a little tough, but they are, always fun to see come to the market.
yeah. I think November will be an interesting time.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think that brings us to the final topic of today's podcast, which is the recent interview I did with Gregory Kissling,
Yeah.
the newly recently appointed CEO of Breguet.
Yeah. I certainly read the transcript, but I'm curious, what was your take on on him, and what are your thoughts on having had that conversation?
I think for me, the thing that came through the most is the fact that he is clearly a product man. From the way he talks about the new products that were launched, you can see he understands the watches very well. He was probably the key part of the development of the watches from start to finish. He has good ideas in terms of product. He understands details. He understands many of the things enthusiasts or collectors look at. So I think in that sense, things will are looking up for Breguet. I think he
Hmm.
will have a positive impact on the brand. That said, the brand is not where it should be. It is probably the greatest brand in watchmaking. It's been quiet for a long time. Um, but that also means, in a way, it's an advantage. It's starting from a relatively low base. I think in
Hmm.
terms of turnover, it's not very big. In terms of production, it's not very big. So to scale up, to grow sales is probably easier than if it was and was at a very high level. So
Hmm.
I would say I'm quite cautiously positive and optimistic about where the brand will be going.
Yeah. One of the things that you asked about that I thought was really interesting was sort of like how does Breguet differentiate itself from peers like or from sister companies like Blancpain, where there is some, clear technology shared across, whether it's the silicon hairsprings or, certain aspects of the chronograph movements, clearly very similar. And how does Breguet make a name for itself and differentiate from the rest? Because like you said, do you feel like he has a vision to really
Yeah.
differentiate Breguet?
I think he does. This vision sort of came throughout the whole interview. One will be unique movements that are unique to Breguet. Two will be talking more about the artisanal crafts that Breguet does in-house, guilloche,
Hmm.
enameling, pantograph enameling of enamel,
Hmm.
um, the handmade cases. Uh, and three will be telling the story of Breguet.
Yeah.
So I think he has the right idea and the ingredients are there. Of course, there will be challenges. For example, I alluded to this in the interview in that the story of Breguet, even though it's a glorious history and a great story, it feels very old, right? When Breguet talks
Hmm.
about his clients, the clients are not David Beckham and Tom Cruise, right? The clients
Hmm.
are Napoleon, Pushkin, uh,
Winston Churchill.
and the places are Versailles, you know, it's not Tomorrowland. So,
Hmm.
this is very, very far removed from today. It's very far removed from all the clients today, whether clients are young or old. So I think commu connecting clients to this world of Pushkin and Napoleon and Churchill and Versailles will be a challenge. But
Yeah, there was also
yep, yeah,
I should say that that along that same timeline, the industry shifted from pocket watches to wristwatches, and so much
yeah,
of the brand history, you know, Versailles, etc., that was firmly in the pocket watch era.
yes, yep,
Breguet has not really had that same level of cultural significance,
yep,
post, the invention of the
yeah,
wristwatch and the brand changing hands
yeah.
subsequently. It'll be interesting to, any thoughts on like how they can, I don't know, capture some of that essence?
I think I think well, this is again something that was alluded to in the interview, and I think they've sort of started doing it in that they have, in a way, reinvented the Breguet look. Right? The latest
Hmm.
subscription watch has no fluted case band, has no guilloche dial. And me and him, we talked about it during the interview in that the Breguet wristwatch as we know it today was not even invented by Breguet. It was not even invented by a French person, right? It was invented by
Hmm.
the English owners of Breguet at the time. So in a way, you could say there is no true French Breguet wristwatch because
Hmm.
the wristwatches made by English people living in Paris. Uh,
Right.
So you could so maybe that gives him more leeway to reinvent the Breguet aesthetic as a wristwatch, which they've already started. And I think they've done a really good job because the subscription watch looks like a Breguet, yet is actually missing most of the elements that we consider a Breguet wristwatch today.
Hmm.
Yet everyone who sees it will say, okay, this is a Breguet, it fits in the catalog, right? It doesn't look like a Ferdinand Berthoud or Berneron or anything else.
Yeah.
So I think if they manage to go down this path, I think they could do a lot there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the nice thing is that, a lot of the rest of the industry has been doing a lot of work to keep some of their key design
Yeah,
elements alive, whether
yeah,
it's Breguet numerals, whether it's um, you know, Breguet style hands. These are all things that even brands like Patek Philippe have
yeah.
used to, on some of their best pieces. And so, it's the history to Breguet has been kept alive almost as it seems like almost as like a community effort
Yeah.
to keep this tradition alive. And so, what I would love to see is it to feel less corporate. It feels
Mm,
very corporate to me. Even the press images, the marketing language, it kind of feels like in some ways they're talking to uh, a buyer of watches in the early 2000s.
mm.
Or somebody that's very
Yeah,
new
yeah,
to this. It's almost like um, an introductory type of
yeah.
disclosures about the movements. I would love to see a little bit more, maybe a little bit less sort of paternalistic language, maybe a little bit more sort of direct technical communication, and just
Mm,
kind of go right at the key thing about Breguet, which
mm,
was innovation. I
yeah,
mean, you know, you carry a Breguet because you want to have a genius in your pocket,
yeah.
the mind of a genius in your
Yeah.
pocket. Um,
Well,
I'd love to.
I'm sure Gregory Kissling will listen to this, and if he starts using that slogan, you should make sure he pays you royalties.
Oh, I didn't come up with that. I think that was David Solomon's maybe,
Okay.
or
Okay.
somebody who actually came up with that. But I mean, like that's where I got it from. But um, that should be they should use that more. They
Yeah,
should.
yeah.
I feel like they should. I don't know. Just be less corporate. Try to create a look and feel. And maybe that's what he's trying to do. Talking about showing more of the artistic crafts, like the pantograph, for example. But even a pantograph isn't like the most. It's not the most interesting thing. I would love to see, maybe deep dives into hairsprings. I would love to see the magnetic pivots come back. That's like the
Mm.
my favorite thing that they've done. That watch was so cool. Yeah, I think maybe even you don't even have to do it uh, with 10 hertz. It doesn't even have to be that.
I'm sure Gregory Kissling will be listening to this, so let's see what he has to say.
And I know it
And
takes a long time. These big ships take a long time to turn, and I got the sense that he was probably dying to tell you about some stuff that he probably can't reveal yet. And so hopefully we'll see that
you know,
that soon.
yeah, we'll see that soon. I think they will have one or two more big reveals before the end of the year. Mm.
I hope so. I mean, it's this is the year to do it.
Okay, I think that is a good place to wrap up. I think, yep, that's it for this episode. Thank you everyone for watching and tune in for the next one.